more than $10 billion in child care and social services funding to 5 states. They're concerned that benefits may have gone to non-citizens. According to the New York Post, citing U.S. officials, the Trump administration plans to freeze funding administered by the Department of Health and Human Services. President Trump posted the article to his Truth Social account. The pause would affect California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York. It includes money from the Child Care Development Fund, temporary assistance for needy families, and the Social Services Block Grant. More than $7 billion in needy families funding alone could be withheld. Officials say letters citing concerns about improper payments were sent to state leaders yesterday. Democratic officials in several states criticized the move, warning it could harm low-income families, while federal agencies continue reviewing alleged misuse of funds. President Trump called California more corrupt than Minnesota and says an investigation into fraud has begun in the state. Meanwhile, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz announced he is not seeking re-election. Joining us to discuss is Mike Leon, host of the Can We Please Talk podcast and director of strategy of Free and Equal Elections Foundation. And we have Tony Kinnett, national correspondent at the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. So first of all, good to see you guys. Happy New Year. And Tony, I'd like to start with you today. Trump didn't provide much details about the post I just read earlier, alleging fraud. What do you think he might be referring to?
Well, I think there are a number of states that have refused to give how the federal dollars and grants, as well as in subsidization of certain programs like Head Start, are being spent in various places that have just decided to refuse any kind of record turnover to the federal government. And that's unacceptable, because when Minnesota refused to turn over how SNAP was being spent, or how certain dollars in Head Start were being spent, or how certain dollars in Medicaid and Medicare were being spent, all of a sudden we found over $18 billion in estimated fraud that was centered around the Somali migrant community. And so if California, which operates in a lot of the same way that Minnesota does, and operating all of these money go everywhere, devil may care programs, and then refuses to turn over the receipts to the federal government, yeah, I mean, I'd say there's a pretty good bet that the president is aware of at least some of the whistleblowing allegations that I've seen over the last couple of years and have participated in myself, that, yeah, if Minnesota's failing to turn things over, there's a good chance it might be because of fraudulent behavior.
Okay, Mike, so some examples here of significant fraud coming out of California, like a mother-son duo sentenced to prison last year for fraudulent unemployment insurance claims. Also last year, 4 were indicted in what the FBI called the nation's largest known COVID tax credit scheme. And due to that scheme, the IRS reportedly issued checks totaling $93 million. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, good afternoon to you guys. You know, I don't know about those figures, so I can't obviously fact check if those are real in real time. I know I saw some popular influencers out there across social media posting about some of the malfeasance or some of the fraud that they think that they have uncovered, or what Trump could be alluding to in that Truth Social post. So I can't speak to those numbers specifically, Don. I mean, here's what I will say broadly. There's nobody that's wearing let's have some fraud in our state t-shirts. There's nobody that's supporting fraud. I haven't talked to any Democrats that are on team fraud. So there is a chance for all of us to be behind how do we uncover waste, fraud, and abuse in this country, whether it be at the state level, whether it be at local municipality levels, whether it be at the federal level. Like, we should all be on the same side of wanting to do that. To Tony's point, the federal government, especially if it's a program that directly gets federal funding for a state, if they're not reporting and giving the receipts, the federal government's within its right to shut off the valve for that. Like, there's no disputing that. That's not a Republican or Democrat talking point. That's a statistical thing. That's like how it works. So there's no pushback there from that. But what I will say more broadly is I think we tend to chase what the president loves to push out on social media, and people love to run with it, and then they've got to apologize later, which they never do. And then we got to figure out where these numbers are coming from, and we don't have a clear indication, because all he said is that there's fraud in California. Well, I mean, I could say there's fraud in Louisiana. We don't know that. We'd have to prove that, right? So how do we get to that state is where I'd like to see what happens in the subsequent months. But everything else is, like I said, we're all on the side of tackling waste, fraud, and abuse, whether it happens in a red state or a blue state. Let's tackle it head on, and let's have the federal government do its investigations, or independent agencies that do these investigations.
So, Tony, the National Association State Budget Officers reports that California fiscal 2026 budget is over $300 billion, and that's among the largest spending plans in the country. Mike says he doesn't see anybody wearing supporting fraud T-shirts. Can you talk to us about how California has handled oversight, auditing, and enforcement across its programs?
Well, I think that at first I'll say that I agree with Mike that there are very few in public that are, at least in an official capacity, saying, yeah, they all claim to be against fraud, unless, of course, we look at the individuals who've spoken up in Minnesota, that the girl who said, well, we all know fraud is bad, and then was so terrified of the men looking at her in the crowd that she stopped speaking. And then when you look at the other influencers that have been caught saying, well, it was actually the fraud was good, it's just bad that they got caught. When it comes to Tim Walz and Democrat officials or California officials refusing to turn over information, going after whistleblowers, we've seen this in both Minnesota and California, Connecticut, as well as Virginia, for that matter, both kind of in the purple, not just the blue in Virginia's case. And I think that it's important here that we ensure that before we say, well, everyone's really against fraud, there are states that are refusing to turn over information under the guise of, well, we're protecting immigrants. We're really just protecting people. And then when the instances are looked into why they're not turning over information regarding SNAP or Medicaid or these major grant programs, often it is because there wasn't any vetting done. They were simply throwing out money like Johnny Appleseed. And that is what I expect to see in California here. Why? Because we've seen it before. We've seen it in regard to the FEMA disbursement of funds in the last 20 years regarding several wildfire situations. We've seen it regarding the bribery of certain county and state officials. We saw it in Kamala Harris' tenure, in which money was moved around and certain prosecutions shifted slightly. It's been a very not so hidden truth that California struggles with honesty when it comes to the disbursement. Like you said, the massive amount of money that California is spending. To be fair, California also does produce a lot of money. So bigger state spending budget from bigger state revenue created. Again, turn over the records. We won't have any issue here.
Okay, so Mike, let's look at action here. Tony says you don't see anybody supporting fraud in public, but when fraud is suspected or found, for example, in California programs, does the state tend to move quickly in terms of enforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if you look at what's happened in Minnesota, just as an outlier, an example, the reporting from the Minnesota Tribune that happened years ago under the Biden Department of Justice and now is continued with obviously Trump's Department of Justice. Like if you just look at the investigations and the reporting that was done at the local level from Minnesota Public Radio about this, Amy Bach and all of the stuff with that program, like how fast has it moved? It's moved at a glacial pace because of the court systems, right? So California is in line with some of those other states that, tend to move very slowly. And I think also as a public, we tend to forget about some of these stories when the investigation starts. We tend to helicopter in on these things. We don't live, Tony and I, none of us live in California or Minnesota. So we don't tend to follow it as well as the local folks that are staying on top of it. So I think that's the other thing that's kind of, made me a little bit upset about the coverage. You got a lot of influence, not even, forget the Nick Shirley thing for a second. Just anybody who comes into the state of Minnesota and says nobody's doing the job here of reporting on this, it's just not true because you don't read the Minnesota Star Tribune, you don't listen to Minnesota Public Radio. They've been covering these stories. So in terms of the enforcement though, Don, I would like to see something net out of this, but the public is going to have to wait. I want to go back to something just real quick though that Tony said about red states, blue states. And this is not a whataboutism game, so I don't want anybody to take this as a Democratic talking point. A few years ago, we had a huge welfare scandal, which I covered on my show, involving Brett Favre in the state of Mississippi and TANF funds and funds that were illegally used there under a previous governor, right? This happens all the time. And again, this is back to the fraud. We're not wearing fraud T-shirts. Just because, Brett Favre's wearing Wrangler jeans and a MAGA T-shirt doesn't mean that he should be investigated less than somebody from a blue state. I'm on team, let's investigate both. So that's kind of where I stand. I want people to understand that. And I want these investigations to take their time. I don't want to chase, I don't want the dog to chase the car because the president of the United States tweeted, California's bad and there's tons of fraud. I mean, I don't know any of that. We don't know any of that. We need to see how the investigation processes tend to play out. So I'm on the side of let's let these investigation processes play out. It doesn't matter about R&D next to the name. Let's prosecute those that are committing fraud.
Okay, Tony, your response, and we would like to hear your reactions as well to Governor Tim Walz not seeking re-election.
I mean, Governor Tim Walz not seeking re-election is a very awkward admission of guilt. I mean, it's just very strange to after, again, he spent years, which the Minnesota Star Tribune did not cover, choosing not to, the Minneapolis Star Tribune not covering the going after the legislative auditor that Tim Walz did, undercutting whistleblower reports, which Tim Walz did. And yes, early 10 years ago, Star Tribune and then Fox 5 covering some of these daycare centers with fraudulent activity, covering some of the rampant Somali migrant fraud, that kind of a cultural behavior coming over to the United States. That's obviously a serious issue. But as far as Governor Tim Walz coming out and saying, well, actually, this is all Trump's fault. No, this is a man who was almost one heartbeat away from the presidency. I've had issues with him since he lied about his military service, since he lied about what he did in his military service, since he lied about what he did as a coach, since he lied about what he did as governor. Now he's saying he's firing people. He hasn't. There have been people who have resigned without any communication from the governor's office. He's a liar. And this is an issue that I have relating to some of the people who've defended him most fiercely. Gavin Newsom. When there's an individual in the Republican Party who commits a serious amount of fraud, he's expelled from Congress, he's made fun of, and then he's sent to prison out in New York. But if we're looking at some of the individuals who have attempted to find censorship for fraudulent behavior on the left side of the aisle, they get the defensive welcome party. And I'm just making the case that I saw a lot of Republicans happy to throw Matt Gaetz under the bus, happy to throw George Santos under the bus, happy to throw Brett Favre under the bus for the Mississippi fraud scandal. But all of a sudden, here we are looking at California, and I can't help but notice a little of the, well, let's not get too hasty here. No, Gavin Newsom could have avoided this months ago. Why not turn over the documents? Just turn it over, Mr. Innocent.
Okay, Mike, your thoughts. And Walt said the situation required his full attention rather than doing political campaign.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would tell to Tony on the Matt Gaetz, George Santos. It took a while for that bus to roll over those people, is what I would say. I want to leave it there, though, because I do agree with your overarching point. But in terms of Tim Walz not seeking re-election, I don't necessarily go as far as what Tony's saying in terms of that it's an admission of guilt. I will say that I think the governor's seeing the writing on the wall. I don't think he has the backing of like local leaders. You already saw Amy Klobuchar kind of throw her hat in there and say she's going to run for governor and try to clean things up or whatever it was that she alluded to the other day. So I think that Walz realized that his political shine and the luster of, being kind of this 4-week, catch a rising star, shooting star, whatever it was of the Democratic Party, to where he is now, just, 14 months later, are two different things. And I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall with respect to that, Don. And he's like, not going to seek re-election. I'm not going to go through this because, again, we're still under investigation. These are still things that are happening under my administration. And I don't think he would win a general election. I think he knows that. And I think I think his team knew that. And I think he got some good advice with respect to that, not the other stuff, but he got good advice with respect to that and said, you know what, I'm going to call it out and I'm not going to run for re-election in 2026. I think it's a smart thing for him to do because I think the luster of him in Democratic politics has kind of gone away. And I don't think this is somebody that, would have gone for the general election or presidency in 2028 because of different things that he has had happen in his own state that is happening under his own administration that's in the public spotlight. And people are like, you can't even get your own state in order. How could you run the United States of America?
Okay, well, the chair of the DNC is a Minnesotan. And I think just as a question, Mike, because I know you and I often talk to people inside the DNC side of things. Do you think that we saw the chair of the DNC come out and say, hey, Walz, you're embarrassing us. You got to knock this off right now?
That's a great point. Those are things that I wish more of the public got to see a little bit of more of these type of conversations that happen behind closed doors. That could be it, Tony, to be honest with you. That could be it. I also think, like I said, the approval numbers, if you've watched, as I have, if I started to read more, like you mentioned, Fox, Minneapolis, Minnesota Star Tribune, NPR over there, not NPR for Minnesota. But as I've watched more of the coverage over there, this has really driven the negative perception about him publicly that I think, as we think voters tend to be very, issue driven, but also singularly focused on the present moment. I don't think he could have carried it towards later on in the year. I think it's something that stigma wise, it would have carried with him. And I just think he got advice internally, but the DNC thing is a very good angle as well.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you, Don.
You're asking the questions now, right?
I'm so sorry. I was just so curious. Mike is such a gem of information.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So I wanted to ask you this, Tony. You said earlier that this is perhaps an admission of guilt on Waltz's part. Mike says he doesn't think exactly in that way. So do you think this fraud is more due to a lack of enforcement, or perhaps it's how the programs were designed in the first place? What do you think?
Very glad to clarify, because I don't just want to put on the tinfoil hat and say, he's guilty of treason. It's Benedict Arnold. No, I don't think so. But there are definite records that show he went after the independent legislative auditor. So we have a state auditor here in Indiana, whereas in Minnesota, that's more of a legislative appointed position. And he went after her. I mean, he threw away reports. That violates the intent, or the section regarding intent to defraud the United States, because federal funds were involved, as well as the obstruction of justice issues. And if it can be shown that Tim Walz essentially went after her at all relating to anything that had a federal dollar attached to it, that's a huge issue. And that's what everyone's asking now. It's, you actually have taken a concerted status to say anyone who questions me is a white supremacist. And that's been his entire mode of operation for the last year. So if he's going to play that now, I think it's less I don't have the momentum. It's that he realizes that it's going to be a very ugly couple of months, given some of the stuff that's likely to come out. Now, Klobuchar being the replacement, I mean, far be it for me to suggest that the lady who beats and berates her staff should probably be the next governor of Minnesota, but I don't know, maybe that's better than rampant federal fraud. What a choice.
Okay, Mike, final thoughts from you.
I can't piggyback on the two choices right there, because we saw what happened with Katie Porter in California and how she treats her staff, and now you couldn't find her on a milk carton for the governor's race. So final thought is really about Tim Walz, in American politics. We'll see you later. But again, I think the overarching takeaway for all of us should be, nobody is team waste, fraud, and abuse, Don. Don't make the shirts, Don. Nobody's wearing that. We are all on the side of uncovering waste, fraud, and abuse. If it happens to be an R next to the name, you should be as vociferous as the person that has the D next to their name.
Well, all right. I got to cancel those orders then, Mike. Just joking. Okay, a great conversation to start off the new year. Thank you both for speaking with us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
$10 billion in funds frozen by the Trump administration for child care and social services. A Health and Human Services official said this will impact 5 Democratic-led states: California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York. HHS said the cuts will be to the Social Services Block Grant, the Child Care Development Fund, and the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. This program cash assistance to households. HHS spokesperson Andrew Nixon accused Democratic-led states of being complicit in fraud and said the Trump administration is ensuring federal taxpayer dollars are being used for legitimate purposes. Did the U.S. violate the UN Charter, specifically Article 2, Section 4, that countries must refrain from using military force against other countries? We talked to a legal analyst